following program contains topical discussions related to suicide. If you are feeling suicidal or need help for yourself or someone you know, please dial 988 in the U.S. or contact your local mental health services. Finding meaning after a suicide loss can be very challenging. Today we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Robert Neimeyer to talk about this and some other things right here on the Hope Debrief. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Hope Debrief. I'm coming to you live, well, semi-live, from the Lost Team Conference here, 2024 in Columbus, Ohio. And with me is Dr. Robert Neimeyer, and I'm so privileged to have you with me today. Thank you so much for joining me.
The pleasure is mine, Robbie. Thank you for inviting me into the dialogue.
Of course. Now, I do want to do a quick bio and just share a little bit for you guys if you don't know who Dr. Neimeyer is. Dr. Neimeyer is a Professor Emeritus of the Department of Psychology, University of Memphis, and you maintain an active consulting and coaching practice still. Mm-hmm. You also direct the Portland Institute for Loss and Transition, which provides both on-site and online training internationally in grief therapy. And I do want to talk about that as before we're done today.
Be happy to do so.
But I'd love to start with just asking you, why did you get involved in this work?
Those kinds of questions are ones that we ask ourselves more and more deeply across time.
Yeah.
I think that the initial answers I would have given might have focused on external opportunities instead of internal needs and passions that I think I discovered in the context of doing it. And so we can always make more sense of our lives looking backward than we can in the moment. And so as I've grown older, I have recognized that a lot of this is really grounded in my early losses. And this is probably why many of us are moved to do work in the area of grief. My grandmother, who we loved very much, Katie Clancy, my mother of my dad, died in our home when I was 8 years old in the context of illness. More tragically, my father died a few years later when I was 11 years old, and he died by suicide. Possibly dealing partly with the unprocessed grief that he had for his mom's dying, but also other factors, his encroaching blindness, probably business difficulties, and more things that an 11-year-old could not understand.
Yeah.
So I think across time I've probably been drawn to listen to stories of loss, in part because I have been living my own. And as we do that, we become more familiar with the questions that folks have, the distinctive pain they have. And so grief has become a topic that for me is very central to living. And it's certainly central to my clinical practice and also my research.
Awesome, thank you. So let me ask you, as you're doing this, and I'm asking a little bit broader questions right now, but what's been the biggest challenge as you've been involved in this work that you've kind of come across, that especially dealing with people who have lost someone to suicide, and just that, what tends to be the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge they face or that I face in doing work?
It could be a combination of both, because obviously as you're helping them, you're seeing what their biggest challenge is. So kind of painting that picture, what's the main thing maybe that we should be looking at?
Well, I think I'd like the way in which you ask it as a double-barreled question that has two kind of points of focus. One is, I think one of the big challenges is that in the world and in the field, we just don't connect with people well in the space of tragic loss. And I can say this at least for the health professions and mental health professions. In 5 years of graduate school and another of internship, I never heard the word grief spoken. We studied all kinds of human conditions of distress and malady and diagnoses, but grief was never given a look. And when it emerged in the literature in some way, it was often in terms of pretty simplistic stage models of grieving.
Okay.
The Kubler-Ross kind of model based on her informal impressions of what happens at the end of life. 5 stages of grief that begin with denial and with acceptance and have some level of bargaining and anger and depression in between. But it really is, of course, far more complex than that. And so one of the challenges that we face in the world and as a field is that the very people we turn to, counselors, clergy, therapists, physicians, nurses, social workers, tend to have minimal training in dealing with really tragic loss, or even more normative losses, though that's getting a little more attention in this area of hospice and palliative care. But the non-normative losses are still treated almost with the level of stigmatization that they once were in the culture broadly. Then if we look at that closer question, like what are the challenges that the bereaved themselves bring when they've encountered tragic loss, then I think there are many ways of phrasing that. One is, of course, the obvious social stigma that tends to lead to people backing away rather than stepping toward such pain. When people do approach others, of course, they often provide a kind of saccharine reassurance that doesn't really carry much meaning. Sorry for your loss. Give me a call if you need anything. Or maybe God needed an angel in heaven. That's why he took your child in this way. And these are unsatisfying, to say the least. They're often very alienating, and even if they arise with good intentions. And so if we say that neither the social world nor the professional world really knows how to meet people in grief, I think that's the fundamental challenge. And then a core challenge, I think, for all of us in our bereavement is to kind of rework the meaning of our life now, to take a deeper look at, what's going on here, and what was going on here. If we've had a loved one who has died by suicide, there are lots of unanswered questions typically. Why questions?
I'm glad you bring that up, because I was going to ask you, because you just got done doing a keynote presentation here at the conference, and called Suicide Loss as a Crisis of Meaning.
Yeah.
And I did want to ask you a little bit more, if you could kind of, I know it's difficult in a compressed time frame, but talk about what you mean by that. What is meant by that crisis of meaning?
Sure. I think that the meaning of it is really conveyed in the questions that the bereaved will ask. They ask them aloud when they can find an audience for them. They ask them silently in their hearts when they can't. And they're questions like, why didn't I recognize what was happening here? Why didn't the person come to me? And at that moment of distress, what did I miss? But also questions like, what was the person's intention in ending their lives? Was this a kind of an abandonment of me or of the family? Were they punishing me or others for something? These are very uncomfortable questions about the meaning of the intention behind the act itself. And of course, there can be meanings of other kinds that are brought into question. Like, how does such a tragedy unfold in life? If I have a child who dies by suicide after a period of struggle, this doesn't fit my image of a just world. Or a world that is governed by some level of predictability, or in which we have some level of control, or where some principles of justice are evident in life.
This wasn't how it's supposed to be.
That's right. And so the world we thought we were living in is ruptured, and we have to find a way of navigating in a space that is much more alien, much more broken, much more unknown than we ever imagined, to contend with the reality of randomness in life. And so, phrased in terms of meaning, it raises questions of a spiritual kind, a philosophic kind, a very practical kind, a relational kind, an emotional kind. Am I guilty in relation to this loss? What do I do with my anger? What do my emotions tell me about what I need now? That also is a question of meaning. So I do think that the meanings that people struggle with tend to be of three general kinds. They're meanings about the circumstances of the death itself. And when we're flooded with all kinds of symptomatology about the trauma of the scene that we stumbled into, or what we heard or saw when we rushed upstairs after we heard the gunshot, or the scene that we imagine as it unfolded, because most of the time we're not present to the dying. It's very disempowering, right? It's like we weren't there, we couldn't stay the person's hand at that particular moment. And so there can be a trauma-saturated story that we're really wrestling with, and it can go around and around and around in our minds ruminatively for years and be very preoccupying. We also struggle with the meaning of the relationship with the deceased. What meaning do they have for us now in our lives going forward? Is the goal just simply to forget them and move forward? Do we silence, they're speaking their names, telling their stories? What role do they have in our lives now? How do we rebuild a relationship with them in the aftermath of the loss? I was just talking to a woman who was speaking about a very, very difficult relationship with her sister, who struggled with addictions of all kinds in life. And after she herself, the surviving sister, 5 years out from the death of her sister, she finds herself now having a relationship with her sister that's much better than the one she had in life.
Interesting.
And that's interesting. She feels her sister's presence. They can have internal dialogues. She's kind of gotten the sister she needs. And so that's the remarkable thing, is the human capacity for imagination, for memory, for rebuilding that which should have been there and wasn't, is astonishing. And it's one component of our possibility of growing through grief, and including growing the relationship. And then the third thing is we often have to figure out, who are we now after the loss? Who are we as a family without this person? Who am I now that maybe the person closest to me in life, or my one child, dies by suicide? Am I still a father or mother? In what sense am I or am I not? What goals do I pursue? What matters to me? So meaning is a matter of what has significance for us. What gives an account of what we've been through. It helps us understand the complicated intentions of another, understand our direction through life and in the world. So it really is it's a big tent that includes a lot of different rings.
One element I would think would be a part of that is the expectations, as you shared the story of the woman you were talking to, because in my first thought is like, it's from my own experience of losing my stepson, of unfinished business aspect. But as you're sharing that, I'm also thinking about ways in which it could be a positive, is the expectations that we put on people and they put on us. And if that's not present anymore, that we're able to really focus on the deepness of the relationship.
And that is an amazing thing that people are often capable of, is to sift back through the relationship. And it's a little bit like the old, movies of guys in the West panning for gold right in a riverbed, and they have a screen that they put down in the water, and they draw up some of the silt at the bottom of the thing, and they look for those gold nuggets in all of the scree of rock and sand as they rinse it off. And we often find those gold nuggets. We're able to separate the wheat from the chaff, to use another metaphor, that which has value and that which doesn't. And we can hold and nurture and circulate and celebrate and ritualize the remembrance of those good moments and special strengths and features of the person.
But not at the expense of not acknowledging.
That's exactly
sometimes
right.
Some of the negative
That's
stuff.
exactly right. It's not a whitewashing campaign. It's not a censoring program where we silence the other bits. But what we often find is we often can find a kind of grace to begin to accept the tragic imperfections of life and of even ourselves and the other person, and then find redemptive aspects in that. Again, that's a longer-term process, but it can begin in given moments. Like when I'm working in therapy with someone and they have unfinished business, by that we simply mean all of those unresolved relational issues, all the things that were unsaid.
I had a fight and we didn't get, I don't know if we really resolved it.
Exactly. We cut off the relationship, never spoke again, and now she's dead. I can't do anything about it. And there's so much that can be unfinished. But what I'll often do is say, I wonder, Robbie, if we could allow you to have a conversation with your stepson, if he, just as if he were to accept the invitation to come back and join us here for a heart-to-heart, father to son, son to father conversation, fully healed from the psychological and physical suffering he carried in life, and ready to have this conversation with Dad. Wow. And if he were to do that, how would he be dressed? If he were sitting in this empty chair opposite you, what would he be wearing?
Yeah.
Would he be looking at you? If so, what would you see in those eyes? And as you kind of close your eyes and imagine that, and just kind of allow your attention to drift down into your heart space and ask yourself, what do I need to say to this young lad, right, who went through such a tough time and who died in such a tragic way? What do I want him to know now about how we're doing, or questions I'm left with here? What might be a way to reopen a conversation closed all too soon by his dying?
I loved how you the first, the thing you said was that he's here, and he would accept the invitation if he could be here, and he's fully healed.
Yeah.
I think for me, as soon as you said that, there was like, wow.
Yeah.
Because I can imagine him being here, but imagining him without that weight and stress that he obviously felt, whatever was causing it for him, whatever, even the multiple layers of it, if he didn't have that.
Right.
And to be honest, when you said that, at the same time, I'm also thinking about my own. And if he's here and he's this way, can I set aside mine and engage with him? Am I able to set it aside, or it's just So you're giving me therapy right here. This is awesome. I don't know how much I owe you for this, but
I think I owe you, because that's a very interesting innovation or extension of the technique. And if you were struggling a bit with that, I might say, I wonder if you can tell him what it's hard for you to lay down about your suffering or your wife's suffering since his dying.
Because I'm not in a place of having to be cautious or be aware. I'm not worried about offending him. I'm not worried about, depending on what somebody may be facing with their loved one, or may have been facing with them. I'm not worried about offending them. I'm not worried about pushing them away. I'm not worried, because they're healed. So they're in a perfect place, if you will, to hear what I'm saying.
I think you really get it. And that reflects the reality of it. I mean, at this point, however we conceive of their continuing existence, if we believe there is such a thing, but even if we don't, then they're no longer in that place of suffering. Where they are, well, we might have some different beliefs about that, but what we know is that they're not going through what they were going through 7 years ago.
Exactly.
And that's an important piece to bear in mind.
That's awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. That has, just me now, that's going to be sticking with me, and just thinking about that. Because as a loss survivor myself, that's something that the unfinished business. But tying in with that, I want to go, before we leave this subject of talking about finding meaning, oftentimes I know my experience with loss survivors, as well as my own, is we have a lot of why questions. And so often the struggle I've seen, the struggle I've experienced, is expecting to find the answer to the why. How does that tie in with this looking for, for the meaning, searching for meaning within this?
Well, I think in life, as in science, we often advance not by finding the answers, but by asking better questions. So if we find we consistently can't encounter the answer to the question we're asking, consider changing the question.
Okay.
Maybe I can't find an answer to that question of why did he do it, or why didn't, why did this happen as it did. But maybe we can ask the question, not a why question, but maybe a what question. What matters to me now? If I can't find meaning in this person's death, can I find meaning in my life now in a way that honors what was good in theirs and recognizes what wasn't?
So perspective change. It so in a lot of ways happens naturally.
That's
you start
right.
reevaluating
That's right.
what's really important
That's
to you. But okay.
And when we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. We start
like that.
seeing the world differently. We start seeing possibilities differently. We may even grow to a place that we do understand the mindset of the other that led to this dark and difficult conclusion. When we move away from wanting to defend against that, we may find that the answer begins to appear. It may not be one that we like, but sometimes we can take it in, integrate it, and then say, okay, what do I do with this?
We can find enough of an answer.
That's right.
To settle ourselves, so to speak.
That's right. And kind of in light of what you were saying before about we don't have to kind of hedge how we ask these questions or whether we touch on things in connection with the loved one. We don't have to walk on eggshells about this now. We have a sturdier ground under us. We can ask the difficult questions. We can seek answers. And we can find meaning even when we can't. Even when we can't find those answers. By asking different questions.
Awesome.
Who matters to me now?
Yeah.
What matters to me now? What do I do with this? What do I want the meaning of the loved one's life to be? And the meaning of their death to be in my ongoing life.
And it's something that we do have, even though a lot of times a loss like this makes you feel completely out of control, but what I do with it is within my control. How I choose to look at it, that's fantastic. I love that. Hey everyone, I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Hope Debrief. I want to take just a moment and tell you about a fantastic new book coming out by Dr. Robert Neimeyer called Living Beyond Loss, Questions and Answers About Grief and Bereavement. In this book, Dr. Neimeyer compassionately engages the heartfelt inquiries of real bereaved people who've lost parents and partners, siblings and children to illness, tragic accident, and suicide and violence. And he offers practical counsel on how to move forward toward a life that can again have meaning. Now, this book is due to come out the first part of 2025, and when it does, make sure to add Living Beyond Loss by Dr. Robert Neimeyer to your library. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Now, in the last little bit that we have here, because I don't want to keep you too much longer, I do want to ask you about the Portland Institute. If you'll tell us a little bit about what that is and what it involves.
Well, the Portland Institute is really graduate school, if you will, for grief therapists. We're not literally a bricks and mortar institution, but what we are is a training institute that provides a whole comprehensive set of certification programs in grief therapy as meaning reconstruction, meaning-focused grief therapy, in family-focused grief therapy, and arts-assisted grief therapy, in grief therapy for non-death losses, and grief therapy for suicide bereavement. Those are our 5 certification programs. Each of them entails teaching basic models and methods, a whole variety of creative techniques for engaging the kinds of questions and work that we've been talking about here. And we meet in small groups, whether online or on-site. We work together to practice these skills. We process our own grief experiences to make us more ready to meet the grief of others. And in this kind of experiential learning then, which happens in many countries at the invitation of organizations that want to sponsor training, maybe for their staff or their community conferences, or in our consistent offering of recorded and live online programs. We just try to work with people across all of the mental health professions and in spiritual walks of life and so on, the chaplaincy, for example, to develop greater capacity to bring non-anxious presence to these very difficult losses, but also with a skill base that lets us do even more than listen with compassion. And so that's the goal of the work that we do. And we also do. I've been involved in research on these topics for several decades within psychology, and so this is an evidence-informed approach. We didn't just make it all up. We learn basically from the bereaved about what they need
exactly,
and what's helpful to them, and then we build that into our training. So.
Now, are these classes available to anyone, or do you have to have a certain education level already, certain degrees?
No, but I should emphasize that they will not make you a professional therapist if you are coming from a different walk of life, but they will make you more grief-informed. So this would be kind of a specialization. And many of the people who take Portland Institute, or PI, we say, PI classes, are interested in maybe just enhancing their work as a death doula or as a hospice volunteer. Or maybe they are involved in the pastoral care arm of their church community.
Yeah.
They want to be more savvy and more creative about what they offer. Or they run a support group for the bereaved, and they'd like to bring in kind of new and creative methods that are engaging and helpful to people. Most people are from some mental health profession, and they may be master's or doctoral level. And we all look at that more basic human struggle that people bring in the aftermath of difficult losses, not only suicide, but really as a function of any cause and context of death. And we see how we might play our role, whatever it is, with them, with more sensitivity, awareness, and imagination than we previously believed was possible.
Just helping people feel better equipped.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's in my own experience is I've had a pleasure of taking some of your classes, some other people, other classes and trainings that are available. And it's not that I use every tool in my toolbox,
Right.
but it feels good to know I've got the tool there.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be a big help. Dr. Neimeyer, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate having this conversation with you. And I look forward to getting to talk to you again really soon.
I enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to many more.
Thank you.
So,
Thank you
thanks,
so
my
much.
friend. Bye now.
As I close out this episode, I want to again thank Dr. Neimeyer for being with us, and as always, a huge thank you to you, our audience, for joining us today. If you like what you heard, please share it with others, and if you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. You can do that wherever you get your podcast from or just by visiting thehopedebrief.com. Once again, thank you for joining us right here on The Hope Debrief.